Look at this courtyard. See how a drop of water rests on a man's cheek, frozen completely still? A bee hovers over a paving stone, its shadow perfectly fixed. A line of soldiers stands with their rifles raised, entirely paralyzed. The man standing against the rough wall is Jaromir Hladik. It is the morning of March 29th, exactly 9 o'clock, and a sergeant has just shouted the final order for a firing squad to execute him. But the bullets haven't left the Nepas. The physical universe has simply come to a halt. We measure our lives by the ticking of clocks, assuming time is a rigid external force. But if the world outside stops, could a lifetime of meaning and creation be compressed into the fraction of a second before death? To understand exactly how Hladik reached this suspended moment, we have to rewind to the night of March 14, 1939. That was the evening the armored vanguard of the Third Reich entered Prague, bringing the relentless machinery of the occupation with them. 5 days later, Hladik, a relatively obscure author and translator, was arrested by the Gestapo and taken to a sterile white barracks on the opposite bank of the Moldau River. His death sentence was handed down for a series of absurdly bureaucratic reasons. He was of Jewish descent, he had signed a protest petition, and a publisher exaggerated his reputation in a catalog to drive up sales. An official glanced at those few lines of advertising copy and casually condemned him to die. Trapped in his cell, Hladik was consumed by absolute terror. The execution was scheduled for the morning of March 29th. For days he lay awake, agonizing over the sheer physical horror of the firing squad. This tree visualizes his strange mental defense mechanism. He obsessively imagined the execution in advance, branching out all the possible forms, angles, and numbers of soldiers. He reasoned that if he anticipated every circumstantial detail, he was actively preventing them from happening in reality. But no amount of mental geometry could stop the actual calendar. His physical body was entirely locked inside the Gestapo's objective, ticking timeline. As that final dawn approached, a different kind of terror overtook him. He realized that his life's work was completely unremarkable. His published academic studies were pedantic, and his translations were riddled with careless errors. He had produced nothing of actual value. This loop illustrates the structure of The Enemies, the unfinished drama he viewed as his one chance at redemption. It was designed as a circular delirium, a tragicomedy where a man is continually pursued by conspirators, only to reach the end of the third act and realize he is endlessly reliving the exact same hallucination from the very first scene. Hladik had only finished the first act. Completing this specific manuscript was his sole opportunity to justify his existence, to leave behind something that proved his life had meant something. Hladik feared dying with his masterpiece permanently incomplete, far more than he feared the firing squad waiting in the courtyard. In the pitch black of his cell, Hladik spoke to God. He made a desperate bargain, asking for exactly 1 year of time to finish his play and justify his creation. Shortly after, sleep flooded over him, bringing a surreal dream. He found himself wandering the massive Clementinium library, where a blind librarian told him that God existed within one of the letters on one of the pages of the 400,000 volumes. Hladik opened an atlas at random, touched a tiny letter, and a voice declared, "The time of your labor has been granted." But he woke up to a dreary, overcast morning. There was no grand divine presence, just an iron stairway, a pile of wood, and a group of bored soldiers discussing a motorcycle while a sergeant offered him a final, pitying cigarette. The squad formed up. He was ordered to step forward a few paces against the barracks wall. The clumsy, shifting movements of the men with their rifles reminded him absurdly of a photographer fumbling to set up a group portrait. His profound internal yearning for a year of creation clashed violently against the indifferent, bureaucratic machine that was meticulously setting up to extinguish him. And that brings us back to the moment the sergeant shouted the final order. The physical universe halted. Hladik tried to speak, tried to move, and realized he was entirely paralyzed. But his mind is perfectly clear. God had granted his plea. The German lead would kill him at the scheduled hour, but between the surgeon's order and the impact of the bullets, a full year of subjective time would pass in his own mind. He spent that subjective year engaged in meticulous mental labor. With only his memory as his workspace, he worked the third act over twice. He eliminated clumsy symbols, adjusted the meter of his verses, and completely reshaped his characters, all without ever writing a single word on paper. He was constructing an invisible labyrinth, a work of human intellect crafted purely within a private dimension of time, wholly untouched by the weapons aimed at his chest. In this frozen space, Halliday was no longer writing for an audience, a publisher, or even for God. He worked for himself, refining each line until the drama reached its own internal completion. After an eternity of drafting and revising in the silence of his mind, he finally solved the last remaining problem of the text. He found the single, perfect phrase to conclude his drama. The drop of water instantly slid down his cheek. He opened his mouth in a maddened cry. The 4 rifles blasted into him, and Jaromir Halliday died on March 29th at 9:02 a.m. The objective clock ultimately destroyed his physical body, but it could never reach the work he had already finished within himself.